Thanks for hanging on. Long day, everybody, I know. Can we kill the lights a little bit, these top lights? Be nice enough to lower it. Sorry, last person says, let's lower the lights. Good, it works. So I'm starting with questions for you guys. And I will route this back and tie it into my talk, I promise. First question, what's our national bird? All right, good. What's our national mammal?
Grizzly bear.
Bison. Not a grizzly bear. Yes, a bison. No, down.
Bison's good.
Thank you. All right, bison, two. All right. What's our national tree? Ooh, oh, good. Somebody got that. All right. What's Utah's state gun? We have a state gun.
Colt 45.
9mm Colt 45. I live in Colorado, so I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
Can we keep the lights?
They're on motion.
I read your motion.
Oh, it's motion.
Yeah.
I'm not the one.
Strobe lights.
All right. What's our national petroglyph?
What was the question?
What is our national petroglyph?
Biologist.
We don't have one. I will come back to that. Okay. I want to thank Nate Wagner. He's not up here, but on behalf of the Outfitters and Guide Association for having me come here. Also Mark Coles-Ritchie. And I've been working with BLM, and I'll describe that a little bit more in a little bit. So I'm feeling pretty good. I've done talks like this over in Moab and a little bit up in Christ as well. So we all know that. All right, let's just keep the lights on and it'll be less distracting. Either way, all right. Wildlife are in our hands. We make the decisions. We just heard that from Cameron as well with respect to one species. I'm going to focus on bighorns, but what I'm going to say will have a little bit broader applicability, I think. We know that bighorns have somewhat of a tumultuous history. All right, what are the issues? You guys all know what the issues are here. I've been working more the northern San Rafael swell, southern San Rafael swell, and over by the Moab. More chaotic scene, I think, than here. But we all know what the issues are. Lots of recreation, lots of money, people who are interested in having a good time, people who are interested in wildlife and geology and fossils. And I'm forgetting other folks, but it's okay. Lots of money involved, a lot of people come here. What we don't know so much about are the effects on wildlife. Cameron even said that. We don't really have good distances of separation. We have maybe some good guidelines. Maybe we're not even sure what those guidelines are. Overarchingly, we don't have a great handle on this because it's expensive to find out, and sometimes it varies by site, which is not going to be a surprise. For the last 5 years, I've been working in Southeast Utah in the spring times because my teaching is all in the fall at Colorado State University, Fort Collins. Mostly camping in a tent, sometimes in my camper. I'm up there in the top left on that little ledge that I probably shouldn't be on, but I was. All right, stepping back again for a second. I want to frame this from like a higher level. Raise your hand if you've been to a zoo. All right, 2/3, 3/4, 4/5. Good. Raise your hand if you've been over to Yellowstone. All right, similar number. What are the properties in common when you're looking at wildlife in zoos and wildlife in a national park? At least some national parks, Yellowstone and Lamar Valley. Habituation. So let's go a little bit deeper. Somebody said the screen is too small. Usually I don't read because you guys can digest this faster, but in the back I will read this. So habituation, pattern of decreased response to a stimulus after repeated exposure. decreased response to something that previously elicited a strong response. Actually, this applies to spotted owls, but we don't have as much information on spotted owls because we don't experimentally harass them for good reasons. We go to jail. Best example, scarecrow example. Scarecrow example, all of a sudden they're nervous, they see an object, but across time, they become habituated. All right, so thinking about bighorns, what if habituation fails to occur? Is it changing across time? Are they increasing in sensitivity to disturbance, decreasing? So that's what I want to talk a bit about today and how we might be able to do better. So we know bighorns have been controversial in national parks, on BLM lands, on Forest Service lands, wilderness areas, lots and lots of controversy. My focus has been on impacts during the most sensitive period, and I'll tell you what that sensitive period is. If you're a mother, a sister, a son, a daughter, or a father, you know that when your partner has gone through pregnancy, the most stressful period tends to be the last trimester, the last 3 months. For bighorns, it's the last 2 months because their gestation length is 6 months, so it's the last 2 months. We know that the factors that influence birth weight, growth, and brain development in offspring tend to be nutritional access and stress. We know this is true using mouse models. We know from domestic sheep and studies of livestock in agricultural departments, same kind of pattern. And we certainly know that for some wild species, particularly white-tailed deer, mule deer in captivity, where big facilities exist, lots of money that goes into understanding stress and neonatal survival or neonatal mortality. So the ingredients for management tend to be both biological, and we've heard some of that, and obviously social, because we're all partaking on BLM or NPS, BLM managed lands, whether it's for a national monument or can have field office. So what we know is that spring is pretty critical. Mark talked about this a little bit earlier. When you get early spring emergent grasses, in this particular case would have been a cheatgrass, crude protein or protein levels are up to like 14 or 16%. For desiccated grasses, it's like 4%. So early in the spring, we have high nitrogen, apical meristematic growth. This stuff is really important for bighorns, especially for pregnant females, and especially in late stages of gestation. Also, we know that 90% of the births are occurring in spring, usually in about a 3-week period, so it's a pretty tight birth season, but there's some spread. And we also know that exponential increase in nutritional needs. But we also have large unknowns. These large unknowns concern different kinds of impacts, and bring it back to the question of habituation. Do people cause displacement, and if so, to what extent? What is the magnitude and frequency of which animals are disturbed, and by type? Maybe all types are the same, maybe all types are not the same. We've all heard one shoe doesn't. Somebody can help me with this one.
Fit all.
One size doesn't fit all. Thank you, whoever said that. Good. And we don't know much about the overall biological costs or impacts. And it is complicated, of course. There's economics, as I mentioned, there's policy, there's freedom, there's choices. And I've heard multiple times, we look to you because you guys are our connection with the public and have much more insight on what's happening in these natural landscapes where you're providing a beacon. Just quickly, in my familiarity is about 200 miles east of here, not so much the Grand Staircase Escalante, but lots and lots of changes across 2 decades in visitation, Dead Horse State Park has quadrupled. Canyonlands is about doubled. Dead Horse State Park gets 1.2 million people a year. Canyonlands 900,000. Even Goblin State Park is growing, getting more. And I've heard throughout here, yeah, we have more and more visitors on the land. So I don't have a good sense for what's going on in Escalante or Zion or other public lands, but you guys do, and those data are probably out there. And this is important because it will help us maybe address some of these questions about habituation. Spring, at least in the areas I'm working, has 50% of the people who show up springtime. It's kind of like Miami Beach or Fort Lauderdale. Hey, if you're from Colorado, or you're from Oregon, or from Idaho, maybe not Oregon, Montana, let's go party in the deserts. And so we know that this is happening. Couple of little factoids, I guess. So bighorns, males have big horns, females have small horns. This is called sexual dimorphism, dimorphism 2, morphism form, so 2 forms. That'll be relevant because I'll make a couple of comments about mule deer at the very close of what I'm talking about. The sexes do things reasonably differently. Male bighorns tend to use flatter areas or rolling hills. They, of course, will use cliffs, but and the foods for both males and females tend to be grass and forbs, shrubs. Grasses in the springtime more so than others, especially because of the high protein content. For females, much more glued to cliffs, escape terrain, protection from predators. People could substitute as predators, I suppose, in some sense. But females will take risks, and so here, but shown yellow lines, we have females off the cliffs. Some females will even rest away from the cliffs, but this is mostly in the springtime where the grasses are occurring. Then we also get some disturbance. So here's bighorns just out here, total flat areas. These are female bighorns, but use of these open areas is pretty much in the spring. All right, what about who's moving where? So males are shown in green, females in yellow. So we have little white, we'll just define these island populations. So yellow for females, green for males. Utah DNR, when we're working with Utah DNR, NPS, BLM. And so some of the data that I'm talking about are based on the satellite collars that we've had access to. So we find that animals move, but it's usually, or almost exclusively, the males that are moving these long distances. Why? I'll come back to that in a second, just trying to emphasize the point. Females are what are called philopatric, meaning small home ranges, pretty loyal to those home ranges. Every once in a while, maybe every generation, a female will go for a long term, but mostly it's males that do these large moves. Why do they do it? Well, males are looking for females. Gee, what a surprise that is. Interesting dog, just treating the wild bighorn the same as domestic sheep, though, not going after it like it would a coyote. But what happens when males do these long movements, what they do is they bring back diseases. They bring back different kinds of parasites. And so these are a big potential problem, especially because with pregnant females, their stress, pregnancy can be affected, and birth weight of neonates is an important factor that determines neonate survival. So what are the stressors? If we think about ecological and just an environment without humans, we have food quality, food abundance, of course there's drought, there's also endemic diseases, and there's predation. To that, what we can do is we can add maybe an entire suite of new things in the environment over about the last, I don't know, we can say 50 years, we can say 20 years, it's a bit arbitrary, but these were not on the landscape if we go back before about 1870, or you could pick 1970. And so the question becomes, how are these factors affecting bighorns and longer term persistence, and what can we do to help mitigate or minimize and increase the chances of better survival, and opportunities for people also to enjoy bighorns, just like what Cameron was saying. Whoa, looking at a Mexican spotted owl, how magic. think about, and you guys know this probably through some of your clients or your own experiences, being out and seeing some magnificent sheep, whether they're little babies or whether it's a male with big horns. People take this stuff home and that's what they remember. So trying to pull this together, the animals have to access food, but there's fear and there's risk involved. And if we turn it over more, there may be more fear and there may be less ability to access the food. And so I'll give a quick synopsis of the kinds of things we're doing, and then I'll conclude by telling you a little bit about what we're finding and not burying you with any data. But I'm going to give a couple of videos that will help make a couple of points. And so if habituation is occurring, we're not going to expect any changes due to any of these external factors. If animals are habituated to helicopters, if they're habituated to ATVs, to hikers, and we see that in national parks, at least in some national parks. So we're trying to understand this using our satellite collars so we can look at habitat use and movements, but then also on the ground, so we're actually watching animals and looking at the responses. And so unlike so many of my peer college professors that spend so much time sitting behind desks, I try to actually watch what animals are doing and then still use technology to help understand. And so here's no response, no disturbance, animal becomes vigilant, and maybe it's fleeing. So the nuts and bolts of what we're doing are some field experiments. We have different study sites, which I'll tell you a little bit about, and then we're asking, well, what are the effects of different types of recreation? So looking at responses shown here in red would be severe responses, animals running, trying to get the heck away from whatever the disturbance is. It could be speed, going fast. It could be a lot of noise. It could be just visual, seeing all of a sudden people, but nothing else is going on. So we're a bit opportunistic in terms of trying to ferret out what the different responses are, but it becomes tricky from a statistical viewpoint. That's all I'm going to say for stats. This is the Moab area. Here's Interstate 70, northern San Rafael Swell. Price would be up here at the top, and Hanksville is where the heck is Hanksville? Hanksville's over here somewhere. So let's see. High levels of exposure to people, medium and low. So that's our gradient. But then we're also involved in trying to look at the effects of different kinds of exposures. This is Kira Cassidy, who's a Yellowstone wolf biologist. She's been assigned to work on this project for the last 4 years, and so we get her gratis for 3 years. So there's pretty nice cooperation between Park Service within Department of Interior. We don't have to pay her. Yellowstone is paying her. We just cover her expenses. She's great. She spends about 3 weeks in the field with me, and then I'm alone for about 5 weeks, which I also enjoy. And so this is what a spreadsheet would look like, and that's all I'm going to say. But so for each observation, we quantify what's responsible and how the sheep are responding. I'm going to give you some real data, and then I'm going to show you a video. So sometimes we're just doing observations through scopes, enhanced here, and I'll give a couple of examples. So here's light disturbance. One sheep looks up, it was no big deal, mountain bikers going by. Another case, I stopped and talked to the mountain biker. He didn't even know the sheep were there. Didn't even know, he was focused on the road. Here's an example, this is a video. Dog, good dog on a leash, good people, dog on a leash, legal. Sheep, male, not sure wants to hang out, but certainly not fleeing, not going fast. All right, let's take an example of an intense disturbance. And so we're going to focus on this area. This is about 25 miles west of Moab, but an area that gets a bit of use, a bit of chaos. So I'm going to draw your attention before I show you the video. I want you to be able to focus your eyes on what I'm going to point out. So at the top, we're going to see sheep which are highlighted here. At the bottom, we're gonna see some vehicles go past. And this is gonna go for about a minute. I'll talk a little bit, but I'm not gonna jump up and down and show things, but so it's not gonna start. Okay, so let's see. You can see sheep up here, a couple of sheep on these rocks. What's gonna happen is the sheep are gonna run. Someone's gonna show up here off of this road. We're gonna move the angle, and we're gonna ultimately, you'll see sheep, but it's gonna be moving, and then they're gonna disappear. So notice the two sheep on top, and they're hearing motorcycles. They haven't showed up yet. They're starting to move. One shows up. Sheep on the backside are starting to split up, not sure what to do. Mountain bike comes by, so it's kind of a pod. Sheep are gonna start to bounce like popcorn in a second. They're still going. You're going to see them still going. You're going to see them still going. We lost the other two. They're going to go behind and they're going to show up again here. They're going to show up over here. Well, and then we lose them. Here's the point on this. They went half a mile and then we lost them. Many times when we talk to people, they assume, oh, they've just gone over the hill. Well, we can't see it because of the cliffs. Sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not true. So I'm gonna go a little bit deeper. So here's, let's see. San Rafael Swell, so just west of the town of Green River, if you've been on I-70 heading west. Radio telemetry data, satellite data, just to show you real data. But we were in the field and heard two Jeeps, and the sheep responded to the Jeeps, and then we never saw the sheep again. So we went back and looked to see what they did. And so I'm going to give you a simulation on that. And this one's short, it's about 10 seconds. Let's see. So we were watching sheep, heard the Jeeps down low, they left. So 6.6 kilometers. So across 4.2 miles, these are the elevations that they covered in a pretty fast period of time. That's a lot of energy they're expending. And these are pregnant females. And so when we take into account and model, because the sheep aren't just running linear, which is what we're picking up off the satellite collars, and we're being conservative here. It was more like something like this. And then we can take here, the dog and hiker, bighorns fleeing. So I'm going to draw your attention to the bighorns, and I'm going to zoom in. Here are the bighorns, here's the dog. They're actually two dogs in the chase. So we did the same kind of thing and charted how far the sheep ran. And then we did this by elevation, which is pretty dramatic when you start to look at what they're gaining. And here, in less than a mile, they've done this again after they've done this. So we were pretty annoyed, went up to talk to the dog owner who wanted nothing to do with us and walked away. So we reported it both to BLM and to Utah DNR. BLM was great about it. This is in the Price office. And BLM said, look, we can manage the land, but we don't manage the wildlife. But they put us in touch with Utah DNR, who we've been in touch with too. So we met with their officers. They took it super seriously. They looked up the license plates, which we gave them. One of the vehicles was rented from Colorado, and the rental agency wouldn't turn over who rented the car. And the Utah DNR officer, who was using it as a wildlife harassment case, when it went up the chain within Utah DNR, they decided that the case wasn't strong enough to show intent. And that'll be important, and I'm gonna come back to that for all of us guys in here to think about how we deal with that, because I don't think 99% of the world is malicious. I don't think that. That's, maybe my biased view, my optimistic view. But I don't think that those guys, they didn't want to deal with us, but I don't think they were out to sick their dogs on Bighorn sheep. All right, let's think about what the cost was for the metabolic increase on these sheep. So if people here have ever run on a treadmill, you can measure your calories, you can wear an oxygen mask, and you can actually get breathing rates, or maybe you've seen other people do this. So at CSU, Colorado State University, this is a plug, but a very biased plug. It has nothing to do with me. 25 years ago, they ran captive bighorns that they habituated, raised as lambs to run on treadmills in which they could increase the speed, increase the elevation, and increase, speed, elevation, and then duration. And so that can be then converted, just like we can do for humans, what it takes to burn energy, or what your needs are. And so what we found out from this is that during late gestation, there's a 44% increase in access in needs for nitrogen or protein in your diet in late gestation. And any of you guys here who have been moms or with people who've been pregnant, gone through it, you know what happens to their appetite in late gestation. So the bottom line here is that sheep are taking risks in the spring, and they need access to good food. All right, a couple of other things, soundscapes. And so some of our BLM conduits said, well, okay, you're doing this stuff on bighorns and recreational disturbance. What about sound? There's just a lot of sound out there. Are bighorns responsive to just sounds? So we thought we would take a look at this. And so what we're doing is we're playing back the calls of hikers like, hey, Mike, hey, Mike. And so we'll do that for 20-second pulses and then take a break and then do it again. We're also doing it for motorcycle sounds, and we're looking at the responses of sheep. And then we're also doing this with ravens. Caw, caw, caw. But we're using ravens as kind of a pseudo control because bighorns are so exposed to ravens that they're really not very responsive. But as a scientist, we need a real control. So what's the real control? Well, that's easy, just no sound when we're doing our observations. And so we're looking at deflection from nothing to ravens to these other sounds to get a better handle. And so in the field, this is what it looks like. We carry speakers, we carry amplifier, rangefinder, wind meter, sound meter, so we control and make sure all the sounds are pitched at the same level. If habituation is not occurring across time, so across time, visitation, this is what we're expecting. Still more flight, a lack of avoidance. If there's no change, that would be no habituation. If there's no change, this is what it's going to look like. And if sheep are habituating, this is what it's going to look like. Bill Sloan's been working on sheep for 25 years, and he's given us all of his data from before 2000. So we have a really unique opportunity to look at before and during, even though this is just Canyonlands and adjacent BLM lands. It's the best data set that's available, so we could try to address this question. So, let's see. Is habituation good or bad? Well, let me tell you very preliminary where we're at and what we think we're finding. And I say preliminary, and I'll show you why I think it's just preliminary. So exposure matters if sheep are not habituated. And so I use this very carefully. If sheep are not habituated. So these are the sheep from realms that they're not so exposed to people. We're finding energy expenditures are something on the order of 5 to 10 times higher than for sheep that are habituated. So there we can identify, all right, well, here's an issue. Habituation is not occurring uniformly. Why would we expect that to happen? We know that densities are decreased and abandonment of some areas, and this is in and around arches, which is just getting massacred with lots and lots of people, a little bit less so at Canyonlands. densities are lower, and also habitat abandonment is happening. And then helicopters are not good. I haven't talked about helicopters, and I'll do that if people ask me questions after. And obviously, dogs and wildlife are not a good mix. And so there's some dependency on what the well, of course there's dependency on what the context is. We're interested in stress hormones, but we haven't gotten there yet, and we're still working on getting some funding, because animals just may be looking at you, just, but they're very stressed. You know, we don't know that, but we can get that from their poop samples. And so we don't have to handle the animals, we don't have to go chase them, we don't have to capture them, we can just get it from poop. And so we're looking at doing that in our different areas as well. Okay, a couple of last factoids, or at least preliminary inferences, I guess, is road sinuosity matters. That's not going to surprise anybody. Think about driving and coming around a road, and there's a deer in the road. You don't see the deer until the last minute. Well, that's kind of what's happening with sound. Cumulative challenge, of course, is trying to figure out where these three different spheres intersect in the Venn diagram and how we do things better. And in this particular case, I'm talking about for wildlife, in particular bighorns. I think the next steps, at least in the way I'm thinking about this, is having stronger dialogue with folks like you guys as to how we can do things better. I don't think it's just like, hey, here's what the dictate should be. Holding some sort of workshops, maybe Salt Lake, maybe here, maybe multiple ones, maybe Moab, maybe Price. You know, I don't know, I haven't gotten that far, but just having dialogue from people on the ground who actually understand these different issues and conflicts, it would be really valuable to try to figure this out. I can say that something like 98% of the people who disturb bighorns have no idea that this is happening. And if I had to guess, I would guess they wouldn't want to be doing, active disturbance. So it's clearly a conundrum. That's what I'd say, 98%. All right, so a couple of different things that I'll just mention is that we've been interfacing with the Navajo Nation to do work on bighorns and looking through the eyes of Jamie Begay, who's a grad student at CSU, and she's looking at the interaction between disease exposure from domestic sheep, 400-year history, Navajo blankets, raising domestic sheep. She wants more wild sheep on the landscape, but understands the concerns about biocultural practices and how we do better. And then different approaches, different ways to try to move forward. And I'm going to end by, I was going to talk about mule deer, but it's late, everybody's been super patient, so I'm going to talk about a species that I want to know if it occurs in bears here. It's a species of mammal. Has anybody ever seen a porcupine in bear's ears?
Grand Staircase?
Sorry, thank you, wrong. I gotta go 300 miles west. Yeah, 200 miles. Yeah, Grand Staircase, thanks. Yes, okay, cool. All right, so we don't know much about porcupines here or in most places. Couple of factoids. So baby porcupines, they're called porcupets. They really are called porcupets. You can hold them, they're super cute, they're used to people, they don't have hard quills, they get used to people, they make little nerfy sounds, so they're pretty cool. Porcupines are the grizzly bears of the rodent world. Grizzly bears give birth about once every 4 or 5 years, so slow reproductive rates. Yes, grizzly bears are an endangered species, but that's why it's hard to get them back, because they're so slow reproducing. Human gestation, 8 months for this. They give birth to 1 per year. They hit sexual maturity of 2 years. Here's the point. If somebody just goes out and shoots a porcupine, a female, it takes 4 years for replacement. So 1 shot, it takes 4 years to get another porcupine back on the land. And so I guess my bottom line is some respect for animals that don't have all the notoriety that like a big game species would, or a Mexican spotted owl, or a peregrine falcon. National petroglyph. We don't have a national petroglyph, right? Why don't we? I don't know why we don't. We should, and here's why we should. So I had the option of doing an op-ed in the Washington Post or Salt Lake Journal. I wanted to do Salt Lake Tribune, because if it was about petroglyphs in the Washington Post, people would think petrochemicals, what's a petroglyph? But in Salt Lake and in Utah, people know what petroglyphs are. And we made the case that why don't we have a national petroglyph? And if we did, it would be biocultural recognition, celebration of pride. It would not be for me, a white guy, to be saying what it should be, but I can express my opinion why this would be relevant. Icon could be good for education, but in the end, it's going to be good for conservation because as more people gather around saying, hey, we have this in rock art, what are we doing to save these species? So with that, I've had lots of help, lots of support, and I say thanks to my sponsors and happy to take any questions.